Going on, No Nation? CJ Wilson here with Dope Talk. Of course, I am your host. I tell you guys all the time that recruiting is pretty much year round, and that's not just for one class. It's pretty much for around 2 or 3 classes that you have to build relationships in advance, leading up to National Signing Day and things like that. So pretty much recruiting is a year round thing, and it could turn to a multi-year thing, just depending on which type of recruit or which recruit rather that you've been recruiting after. So long story short, FSU is wrapping up and putting up the finishing bow on the 2025 recruiting class. Recruiting cycle, still hosting a few official visits down the stretch to put a bow on it. As you guys know, it's the early December signing, and of course the, I guess you could say, regular signing day in February that FSU is trying to wrap up with a few prospects down the stretch for the 2025 class. But now it's time to gear up and get familiar with names for the 2026 class. I know. Once you kind of get familiar and, I guess comfortable remembering some of the names for the prior class, and that signing day is closed, you pretty much jump right into the new class full swing, going into junior day visits, visits in spring practice over the summer, official visits, and that type of deal. And that's pretty much the commitment season, so to speak, during the summer. So we're pretty much right back in the swing of things again for the 2026 recruiting cycle, and FSU is hosting an elite. I mean, an elite. I want to give a shout out to these coaches for pretty much do all the work they've been doing in the last couple of weeks and trying to build up for this junior day. Of course, you guys know the last few weeks the coaches have been on the road across the country, giving out offers, building relationships, and things like that. And that work has paid dividends as a lot of kids have poured into and made a decision to come to FSU for the first junior day of the 2025 recruiting cycle for the 2025 class. I'm going to jump into some names real quick, but before we get into it, make sure you guys like this video and subscribe to the channel. Like I said, go ahead and like this video. Get this information out to like-minded Noles fans like yourself that want to hear about this type of stuff. And also hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Welcome to the Dope Talk family. Pretty much cover everything, all FSU. I think you'll like it over here. So go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe button as well too. All right, guys, let's go ahead and jump into it. FSU is hosting an elite junior. There's probably over 100 kids on campus. I can't really go through every kid that's going to be visiting and things like that. That's going to be upcoming seniors and upcoming juniors for this upcoming football season, because if I do, we'll be pretty much on this video all day, kind of going over names and things like that. What I am going to do is name a few kids that I feel like you should probably get a little bit familiar with for the 2026 recruiting class that FSU has on campus, a few kids that's kind of standing out in my opinion. So we'll go ahead and get started with these names. Like I said, I know it's going to be a process, kind of get familiar with these guys as you just wrapped up the 2025 recruiting cycle. Now it's time to jump into for the 2026 recruiting cycle and get familiar with these names. Going to go through some names on the offensive side and defensive side, even though this junior day, in my opinion, is heavily focused on the defense. But we're going to go into it from there and give you guys the information nonetheless. But the first visitor I want to discuss this weekend that's going to be on campus for FSU's elite junior day is Amari Clemons, 4-star running back out of Marianna, Florida. If you guys are familiar with the Panhandle and familiar with Marianna, this is pretty much within FSU's backyard, around an hour away from FSU going to the west. He did recently state, he was on campus a few weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken, as well. And he did recently state that FSU is his leader. So this is a recruitment to monitor going into this visit, and of course going into the spring visits as well. As Amari Clemons, a local kid, so to speak, will be on campus again. 4-star running back, states that FSU is the leader. We'll see if FSU can build upon that lead after this weekend. This Saturday, this weekend, how you want to call it. Somourian Wingo, this is an interesting one. 4-star wide receiver out of St. Augustine, 6'2", 175 pounds. He recently joined the MFTK 7-on-7 team that's ran by former FSU fullback James Coleman. So that's something interesting to watch. Wingo has a prior relationship to FSU receiver coach Tim Harris going back to his UCF days. So this is an interesting name that's going to be on campus as well. Big-time playmaker. I like Wingo a lot. Moving on to the tight end position, this is a guy that we should look out for as well. Xavier Tillman, Xavier Tiller, a 4-star tight end out of Georgia, standing at 6'4", 212 pounds. He is committed to Texas A&M, but that hasn't stopped the interest on FSU side to pursue him. And also the interest is being reciprocated, in my opinion, as far as Xavier Tiller, as this is the first visit that he set up for the 2025 year. FSU was his first offer as well, so that does kind of hold weight. So we'll see if FSU can knock a chip into the recruitment and knock a dent into the commitment of Xavier Tiller to Texas A&M moving forward. But this is a tight end that FSU covets pretty highly. Moving on to the offensive line, as you guys know, Coach Han Hurts did a hell of a job, and I don't want to say flipping the offensive line room, but putting a real nice ace bandage tape on it now as far as the transfer portal with guys that could play right away, guys that played at prior schools, all conference type of honors, and trying to build it up with recruiting high school kids and bringing those guys on campus. And this one pretty much falls in that category as well. Canon Pickett, 4-star offensive line, interior target from the Tampa Bay area. University of Miami is recruiting him as well, staying around 6'4", 290 pounds. This is a guy to watch out for as Coach Herb Hand is kind of building upon that offensive line. All right, guys, let's move on to the defensive side of the ball, and these guys are cooking on this side of the ball. I want to give a big shout out to the defensive line coach, Terrence Pot Roast Knighton. He's on a hell of a job on the recruiting trail. He has a plethora of defensive ends and defensive tackles that will be on campus for this junior day. A lot of high-level guys. When I say high-level, a lot of big-time prospects. So I want to give a shout-out to Coach Knighton for the hard work he's done in a short period of time for FSU and just building relationships and also carrying over relationships that were previously formed at Nebraska, the previous spot he was at. And speak about previous relationships and things like that. Jamarion Carlton, 4-star defensive end from Texas. He's a top 50 player in the country, big-time prospect, sitting at 6'4", 240 pounds, will be on campus for the first time ever for this junior day. This was a huge development as far as the relationship with Coach Pot Roast Terrence Knighton, as far as that building that relationship and kind of carrying over to FSU. He was recently offered by FSU on January the 1st, and after that offer that was given by Coach Knighton, he quickly turned around and scheduled a visit to FSU. That's on the chin. Perfect. He then turned around, like I stated, and scheduled a visit to FSU for this weekend. This relationship kind of goes way back, as him and Coach Pot Roast has a really close relationship. Coach Pot Roast was Nebraska was his first offer, rather, when Coach Terrence Knighton was coaching up there, and that relationship has carried over. I think he has a crystal ball to Texas, as it is hard to get a top 50 pass rusher out of the state of Texas, but nonetheless, he is showing interest in FSU and pretty much letting that relationship with Coach Knighton carry that interest. We'll see with him, this being his first time on campus, can FSU, Mike Norvell and staff really open his eyes to what FSU can do for him moving forward as a football player, especially defensive ends and defensive linemen. As you guys know, that's something that FSU has been putting out at a very high level, and I expect that to continue under Coach Knighton. Trenton Henderson. This is a guy that you should get very familiar with. Trenton Henderson, 6'4", 225 defensive end from the Pensacola area. He's another top 100 pass rusher, standing at number 75 in the 247 composite ranking. This is a kid that's trending in the right direction for FSU. He's been on campus prior as well. Coach Mike Norvell and Coach Knighton were over in the Pensacola area doing a visit with Trenton Henderson and was able to do a quick turnaround to get him on campus. A big-time pass rusher who's getting pretty much offered by everyone in the country. It's good to get him back on campus and let FSU build on this recruitment. This is a name we should be looking out for in the future, as I feel like FSU will be a player first recruitment all the way down the stretch. Sticking with the defensive line again, Zavion Griffin-Haynes, the 6'6", 220-pound defensive end from North Carolina, 4-star defensive end. He will be on campus as well. Like I said, Coach Knighton is doing a hell of a job. Cartrell Webb, 6'2", 230-pound, I guess you could say DN/backer. He will probably be a jack backer within FSU's defense. As you guys know, it's a backer that pretty much rushes the passer exclusively. Had 13 sacks and 29 tackles for loss this past season for Webb. So this is an interesting one. James Johnson. And Cottrell's out of Georgia as well, like I stated, Swanee, Georgia, to be specific. James Johnson, 6'2", 270-pound defensive tackle for Fort Myers. He will be on campus as well, 4-star prospect. Moving on to the linebackers, and there's going to be just some linebacker bodies that's going to be on campus as well. Really interesting to see, I guess, all of these, something we haven't been used to as in recent years from FSU fans, a lot of activity and recruitment within the defensive line and the linebacker room. Something we really didn't see too much down the stretch for Odell Haggins. And of course, Randy Shannon, his boards weren't really that plentiful when it came to the guys who were selecting. That's pretty much out the window, as FSU has a plethora of linebackers that'll be on campus for this upcoming weekend, including 5-star linebacker and number 1 linebacker in the country, Xavier Griffin. Griffin stands at 6'3", 200 pounds. He is currently committed to USC out of Gainesville, Georgia. We'll see how this plays out. This is a kid that, like I said, he's committed to USC, but FSU has been in the picture of his recruitment for the majority of it. We'll see if they can keep chipping away at the number 1 linebacker in the country once he's on campus this weekend. And I will say USC has done a hell of a job in Lincoln Riley and recruiting the Southeast and things like that as far as getting commitments. Now, it hasn't really balled well for them as far as signing day and signing the majority of them, but I think he does realize where the talent is in the country, being Oklahoma and things like that, and that's in the Southeast for the most part. Rodney Colton Jr. This is another linebacker, 4-star, 6'1", 220 pounds from the Georgia area. I tell you, Georgia plays some good damn ball. He's currently committed to the South Carolina Gamecocks. We have him on campus as well, too. Isaiah Williams. This is a name that should be familiar for FSU fans. 4-star linebacker out of Leesburg, Florida, standing at 6'1", 205 pounds. He was committed to Florida State. He committed to Florida State during his junior year. Early in his junior year, he ended up decommitting from Florida State due to the 2-10 season, knowing that there's going to be a lot of coaching changes as far as transitioning from a 2-10 season to try to right the ship for FSU. A lot of coaches wouldn't be around. A lot of new coaches will be hired. So he decided to step back on that recruitment and things like that. Still open to FSU, and the communication has continued, and it's going to be great to get him back on campus. I think FSU is still a player within this recruitment. The University of Florida is also one to watch for Isaiah Williams. Moving on to the defensive back room. This is my wheelhouse, right? I love my DBs, love my corners and safeties. We have a few that's going to be on campus that could be difference makers for FSU if they decided to commit for the 2026 class. Dorian Barney, he's a 4-star defensive back standing at 6'1", 175 pounds, a top 100 player from Carrollton, Georgia. If you guys remember, FSU has had pretty good success in Carrollton, Georgia as of recent, and within the defensive backs going to the 2025 recruiting class. Shamar Artnox, 4-star defensive back, committed to FSU from Carrollton, Georgia, and also 3-star cornerback Antonio Cromartie Jr., legacy commit, recently committed to FSU as well. So you had 2 defensive backs commit from Carrollton to FSU in the prior recruiting class, and FSU is trying to strike gold again in Carrollton with Dorian Barney's pledge. He's a big-time player. It's going to be good to get him back on campus. Like I said, there's going to be some familiarity as well with 2 former players from Carrollton, not just players, 2 former defensive backs, same position room on campus as well. So that's going to be interesting. Lasiah Jackson, 4-star defensive back from Leesburg, Georgia, standing at 6'3", 170 pounds, being recruited for as a safety by FSU. If Leesburg sounds familiar to you guys, it may be because 4-star running back Usman Kromah went to Leesburg as well. I think Us was a pretty popular kid and has a pretty big impact within the Leesburg area. So just look for that in the future as far as, a lot more action from kids that played at Leesburg to kind of follow commit to FSU, but have a lot of interest in FSU due to the relationship they had with 4-star running back, elite 4-star running back, I may add, Usman Kromah. Caden Hall, 6'3", 195-pound defensive back, 4-star from Milton, the Panhandle, right? That's one thing I will say. FSU, this staff specifically, Mike Norvell, if I'm not mistaken, are pretty much, they're trying to keep your local kids home. The Panhandle was about 2 hours away. Well, Milton is about 2 hours away. You want to keep those types of kids at home. You got, of course, Like I said, Caden Hall, he's from Milton, Georgia. Milton, Florida, my apologies. You have Trenton Henderson, who's from Pensacola, Florida. Amari Clemons from Mariana, Florida. So all of those guys within the west side of Florida, the Panhandle area, but within 2 hours of FSU, you want to prioritize those kids. The University of Florida, University of Georgia are other schools involved with Caden Hall. He's an elite, big-time prospect for a defensive back. Will be a hell of a get for FSU. But Patrick Surtain is chipping away at this recruitment, so it's a great thing to get him back on campus for this junior day. And last but not least, Samari Matthews, 6 foot, 185 cornerback, big time playmaker. He is the number 65 overall player within the 247 composite from North Carolina. He currently has crystal balls to Clemson, so we'll see if we can chip away at this recruitment as well, getting him on campus. My apologies. Like I said, there's so many names to cover within this 2000 for this first mega junior day. Can't cover them all, but there's a few prospects I wanted to talk about as far as FSU that I feel like you should be kind of familiar with going into the 2026 recruiting cycle, going into the spring practice and things like that, spring recruiting visits, going into your summer recruiting visits as far as official visits. And as you guys know, after that, it's pretty much commitment season for the 2026 class. So recruiting is year-round, is never stopping, and we move forward to 2026. FSU's hosting their first big elite junior day for this season. Hopefully we can kind of develop these relationships and get kids on campus and get them comfortable while being on campus. Again, make sure you guys like this video, subscribe to the channel. We'll have more quick hitters coming for you soon. Go Noles.